Good afternoon and welcome to today's Director's Cut. We will begin with Director Lynn Helms.
Thank you, Bethany, and thanks everyone for tuning in to see how things are going in the North Dakota oil and gas business. We're talking about May production, although it is July and it's hot and smoky outside. We're looking back to the month of May. Numbers are pretty much what we expected. Kind of figured with the spring weather just expiring and extended road restrictions because of the wet spring we had, that May would be pretty flat, and that is exactly how it turned out. The drop in production, 2,200 barrels a day, isn't even enough to calculate a percentage. So essentially you could say oil production was flat, gas production up just 1%, which means that the gas oil ratio is slowly climbing again, just slowly climbing. A little bit of a head scratcher, and I haven't had time today to really dig into it, but why the rig count is at 36 today is really kind of a mystery to all of us. With the oil price where it's at today, it looks like North Dakota crude should be fetching about $74 a barrel. Which means that we're well above revenue forecast in terms of production 13% above revenue forecast in May, and revenue price only 10% below in May. And then today revenue forecasts were pretty much right on it at $74 a barrel. At those kind of prices, one would anticipate more activity than we're seeing. So a little bit of a head scratcher. Met with one operator yesterday, though, who had, through mergers and acquisitions, they've picked up acreage in Montana. And so they had 2 rigs operating in North Dakota. They now have one of those bouncing back and forth across the border. And so on any given day, it could be in Montana or it could be in North Dakota. And I think that's kind of a common theme. We've seen a significant amount of acreage change hands just recently. We saw XTO acreage go to Cord Energy. We saw Ovintiv acreage go to Grayson Mill, and Grayson Mill did not have a capital budget to act on that acreage. And then most recently, we're looking at some of this. I'm not sure who the seller was, but the buyer is Kraken and Neptune. And so, it's Bowline acreage, and some of it's in Montana, some of it's in North Dakota. So I think we're seeing a lot of chatter in the merger acquisition area, and that's disrupting budgets, and that's affecting our rig count. Now, I think the great news is that we're at a post-COVID record in terms of frac crews. As of today, 26 frac crews. So we should really see a good surge in production over the summer, as a lot of those duck wells are completed, and as they get out, ahead of the drilling rig count in terms of well completions. So we're looking forward to better numbers June, July, August as things move forward. We saw the inactive well count come down about 120, so that's a big positive. And interestingly enough, our active well count, new all-time high. Just a shade under 18,000 wells active and producing in the month of May. So we should burst through that 18,000 number. I think it's also interesting that in June, I believe, in June, we permitted our 40,000th well in North Dakota. So that's kind of an interesting milestone. So we surpassed 40,000 in the permit count, and I think cases, we surpassed 30,000. So we're making history, but the growth is slower than one would think that you'd see at $74 oil. Most of the drop in activity happened on Fort Berthold Reservation, down to only 3 rigs operating there, all of them on trust lands. So that's a little interesting, especially since the gas plant at Robinson Lake, which processes the fee lands acreage, has actually expanded their takeaway capacity and are transferring gas all the way over to the Sanderson plant, operated by Outrigger over on the North Dakota-Montana border. So we did plug 18 wells in the EJA, the federal grant program, in the month of May, only 9 in June. So again, an indication of how wet it was late May, early June. As far as oil and gas or oil inventories, both the world inventories and U.S. inventories are at normal, with the exception of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That is very hard to say. And so when you're that close to exactly balanced, as we are, just basically production is equal to demand worldwide. Any sort of disruption can cause a pretty high change in prices, and we've seen that lately. April price for WTI was $79, and then May fell to 72, and then today we're back up to 77. So, you know, some pretty large swings, 10% swings in WTI oil price, and likewise even more than 10% swings in North Dakota Light Sweet. And that's what happens when the production and demand are so closely in balance that any kind of world event or economic event can spook the market and cause prices to spike up or spike down. Gas capture in really good shape, 95% statewide, 96% in the Bakken, and mostly 97% on Fort Berthold. So very happy with the gas capture numbers. And with regards to comments, you know, on federal activity, we did submit comments on the BLM proposed rule to elevate conservation as a multiple land use, stating that it isn't in compliance with Federal Land Management Policy Act, or FLPMA as they call it, and we are preparing comments on the EPA greenhouse gas rule. So we're working. The lead on that is probably going to be the coal industry and the Department of Environmental Quality, but we'll be coming in maybe a good tight third on that. Interestingly enough, New Mexico production, which is the state that surpassed us as the #2 producer, the increases there continue, but at a much slower pace. So we're kind of interested to see whether they see any kind of a summer surge down there. I think they're experiencing extreme heat while we were experiencing extreme wetness. So we'll see how that goes. That's really it for the oil and gas side of things. I'd be happy to take some questions. I know there was one question that came in about natural gas takeaway capacity. We're going to pass that one off to Justin. He's the expert in that area. And I think a potential question came in about the new rare earth mineral press release that we put out and the new study. And I'm going to pass that one off to my state geologist as he is the expert in that area. I guess I should call attention to one other item that I had in my stack of stuff here, and I forgot to mention. It was really a big announcement yesterday that ExxonMobil purchased Denbury Resources. And so, you know, there's been a lot of, I guess, questioning about our vision for how carbon storage and carbon utilization were going to play together and how all this was going to happen. I think what you're seeing is really large amounts of capital now flowing into that space. And I think this really confirms the North Dakota's vision for this, that carbon storage is kind of the initial phase of this whole carbon capture thing, but that the larger companies and the large amounts of capital are looking longer term and looking at carbon negative oil, carbon neutral oil going forward. So the CO2 that comes to the Cedar Creek Anticline and to Cedar Hill South Unit, it comes out of Wyoming and it comes out of an Exxon gas plant. And so you can see that ExxonMobil is looking at the Cedar Creek anticline saying, well, potentially this is a really great, promising carbon utilization area for producing carbon neutral or carbon negative oil, but long-term, tremendous potential for carbon storage as well. And so it all ties together. I know a lot of people have questioned how North Dakota views this thing, but I think this is a serious confirmation for a company like ExxonMobil to put almost $5 billion into a company that has developed carbon utilization and storage as its theme, which Denbury is, really accents that our vision is in sync with where the capital is flowing and where the industry is going in terms of how carbon is going to be managed over the next 12 to 40 years. So with that, I will stop and take questions.
Also, that there are going to be potentially uses for the carbon, for example, in greenhouses, things like that.
Yeah, the question was, are we looking at potential uses for the carbon in greenhouses and other places? And absolutely, Dave. I was in Grand Forks Tuesday for the Energizing North Dakota's Future, and there was a company there that is producing composite countertops out of captured carbon. They're turning it into a calcium carbonate material that can be mixed with the epoxies and that to make artificial granite for countertops. So there's a lot of research going into that, a lot of research on the part of our EERC folks, but also investors and private industry looking into ways that we can use it. I know they're looking at replacements for the epoxies that windmill blades are made out of and all of those things. None of those at this point have the percentage to get you to carbon neutral or carbon negative like enhanced oil recovery or 100 billion tons of storage capacity in subsurface reservoirs. But we're not leaving any of those stones unturned. And that's a bad pun. We're making fake granite out of carbon dioxide, so we're turning every stone.
With that, thank you, Lynn. If you have any questions for Lynn, please submit them in the Q&A in the chat feature. We will turn it over to Justin Kringstad with the Pipeline Authority.
Ready? Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. Fairly routine update here this afternoon, and we can dive into some pre-filed questions that came in on the natural gas topic. But as we bounce through the 2022 and the 2023 oil production, again, fairly sustained production from our neighboring states. There are 0 rigs as of at least today in eastern Montana, South Dakota. But again, as Lynn alluded to, we do see some of those rigs bought back and forth, and so we do expect some stability in at least Montana's numbers and likely maybe some continued slow decline unless we see an uptick in activity south of the border there. When we look at slide 4 with the changes month to month, again, nothing significant on the crude oil or the natural gas side, but the GOR is starting that continued slope upward. That is on trend with what we would expect, and we're continuing as we're looking at a lot of the solutions for gas capture, that ratio of natural gas production to oil is going to continue to that upward trend with some ebbs and flows along the way. We did in May see some additional shifts for barrels being transported out of North Dakota, with the shift leaning towards pipeline movements out of the region. We saw a 2% gain in pipeline flows market share out of the region and a 2% drop in rail utilization in that month of May. And that dotted line there, that Brent WTI spread in the month of May, it was sub $4. It was $3 and some odd cents. And so that was certainly for any barrels that had that flexibility. again, that's an indicator that they would likely prefer those pipeline markets as opposed to the rail destinations around the U.S. On slide 7, as we look at what prices were being paid, Pad 1, Pad 4, again, when we look at the Pad 1 market and the Pacific Northwest and even the California market for Bakken barrels, there is no other way to get a Bakken barrel there other than rail car. But the Pacific Northwest typically is a preferred route. Those refineries do run very, very well on that Bakken light sweet crude. And then the transportation rate from North Dakota to that Pacific Northwest is typically a fair bit less than the transition over to the East Coast, where you may have multiple carriers on that route. And I did some more digging, and we were seeing some moderate, I would say minor movements of crude by rail from North Dakota to those California markets as well. So it's not exclusively the Pacific Northwest, just some, very, very limited deliveries, though, still going to those California refiners. And when we look at that estimated movements in May, roughly about a train a day, and that's 70,000, give or take, barrels per day range, leaving the state and primarily headed to the West Coast. And again, lion's share that up in the Pacific Northwest, limited amount to the California refineries. When we look at prices here today, still strong pricing at Clearbrook, Minnesota for those Bakken barrels. It's continuing to help North Dakota. We've continued to enjoy very strong netback pricing for those royalty owners, the industry, and the state. That Brent WTI spread still sub $5, so not expecting a rush back to any type of rail movements out of the region. And then continued strong pricing for those Gulf Coast barrels where Dakota Access goes down and competes. Very consistent, those truck rail movements north and south of the border, so nothing notable on that front. Consistent, again, flaring numbers, 5%, 4% from wells that are connected, 1% from wells that are unconnected. So that is consistent again now for a number of months, which is very, very encouraging that we haven't seen thus far with some growing gas production. We haven't started to see any flaring numbers uptick with that. So that is certainly encouraging and shows some of the commitment we're seeing from all operators out there. When we look at well connects on pace, again, very, very good scheduling coordination between the producers, the midstream operators to make sure that those pipe connections are there when those wells are coming online and making sure that we don't see any challenges on that early phase of production. The EIA's updated oil price outlook, again, July and June and those outward second half of 24 were the same, unchanged, growing up into that $80 per barrel range. As the marketplace nationally, globally continues to balance itself out. As we go forward, we're starting to see on the horizon some of the refilling of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve being built into the pricing and the outlook. So that's all going to have an impact on those overall balances. On the natural gas front, again, here in a moment, I'm going to talk about some residue transmission developments and how that's continuing to move forward. As we look at this, I don't have any concrete numbers yet. I'm trying to figure out the best way to calculate it, but what is going to be the need for that next slice or multiple slices of new gas processing to feed some of these expansions and the commitments we've seen for residue takeaway out of the basin. We know that what we have up on chart slide 16 is not going to be adequate long term. Even the commitments that we've seen come here in June and prior for not only the grasslands but the Bakken Express project indicate that there's an industry demand and commitment to more gas capture. And in order to fill that, we're going to need additional investments and substantial investments in more gas processing here in the state. Northern Border, just a quick update on that system. Now, again, north of 80% market share for those Bakken gas deliveries on that system and sub 20% for those Canadian molecules coming down. We're now seeing Northern Border back up above 1100. We've seen very, very strong activity in the last month or so for gas production in the region. And as we continue to take more and more market share on Northern Border, typically those Bakken molecules have a higher heat content. And again, there are no rules in place today, but just a reminder of the 2020 filing where there was an attempt to put a limit on North Dakota's transmission systems leaving the state. But as of today, this is just, again, a marker for us to be watching as we see that creep up. Should just have that in the back of our mind of whether or not we're going to see that come to a head again and come before the FERC. So an update then on the Bison Express, Bakken Express. Still trying to keep all the names straight for folks. My understanding is that TC Energy, they have their components. They're the ones that are going to be expanding the compressor stations, 3 facilities in western North Dakota down to that Glen Olin facility. Their component of the project, as well as the reversal of Bison, is the Bison Express. Kinder Morgan, through their systems on the southern end of this project, they're the ones that are going to be then managing the space and the capacity and the shipping of the gas through that system, and they are referring to it as the Bakken Express project. So both names are still consistent and adequate or appropriate, but again, just to keep things straight for folks of how folks are looking at that. And the capacity, they did have a successful open season process that did close in June. Those conversations, whenever any open season closes, it's followed up by weeks and potentially months of further discussions with interested parties to see, are there other terms, things that need to be worked through. But they are going to continue to move forward with it. Depending upon what they're able to secure, it's up to 430,000 decatherms per day of capacity. If the commitments aren't there, we may see a number that ends up being less than that 430 for that capacity leaving the region. Still anticipating that 2026 in-service timeframe when that goes forward. I believe that's my last slide, but I think there were some questions pre-filed that I can dig into. Bethany, if you can remind me.
So Justin, you mentioned the Bakken Express and Grassland South expansion projects during last month's briefing. What impact do you expect these projects to have on production and or natural gas prices in the Bakken region?
Perfect. Yeah, if you want to go back to this slide 21 on. So Grasslands and Bison, similar projects, 2 different operating companies executing on them, but both heading down to that Cheyenne hub. So when we look at North Dakota's natural gas production going forward, those 2 projects are absolutely critical for North Dakota, not only our natural gas production to grow, but then enable to maintain and hold steady our oil production from the region. If we did not have these 2 projects moving forward, North Dakota's crude oil production activity levels, state revenues, royalty owner impacts would be substantial. And so these 2 projects are absolutely critical to the longevity and health of the region. I think there was a question there on pricing as well.
How much additional natural gas egress capacity would you say is needed out of the Williston Basin over the next 5 years?
Okay, perfect. Yep. So when we look out 5 years, let's look out to that 2028 timeframe. That would assume that Grasslands is in service, and that assumes that the Bakken Express project is operational out in that 2028 timeframe. Even on top of Grasslands, on top of the Bakken Express, I'm still anticipating a need for another 300,000 to 500,000 decatherms per day of egress capacity. So these 2 projects are absolutely critical next steps. They're not the end-all be-all. I think we need additional projects above and beyond those in-state, inter-state systems in order to continue to keep the Bakken and this region healthy from an activity standpoint.
Thank you.
Yeah, just trying to rack my brain. You're talking about FERC issue a couple of years ago about restricting the amount of gas.
So the question was about the FERC, the 2020 filing. So in 2020, TC Energy put a request in that natural gas leaving North Dakota, basically exiting the Glen Olin point, couldn't exceed 1,100. And FERC ultimately rejected that, but they left the door open that in the future, if there's a market push again or a market need, that they would consider that application again if it came forward.
Hey, yes.
No, was there a price question on there as well? Okay, Perfect. Yeah. So the pricing, I thought there was a pricing component, or maybe someone else had asked me about that, of what these would do to pricing. Again, North Dakota's natural gas pricing is tied to those Ventura, Cheyenne, ACO pricing. We don't have a transparent market price point here in the Bakken. So again, it's those kind of triangulated pieces then, and as well as Chicago, that influence that North Dakota price. So I don't know that these systems are market makers, but they're going to continue to participate then in what that Cheyenne and those Rockies prices are doing at the time.
Do you have any rough figures about how much of the natural gas is being used for power production, how much is being used for home heating?
Within the state, so the question was about the utilization between power gen and as well as kind of the residential commercial utilization. We have all those numbers. I don't have it off the top of my head, but yeah, the utilization even nationwide for gas-fired power generation is continuing to grow. So that component of that market share it's not little anymore. It's a substantial piece of the U.S. gas utilization.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you all.
thanks.
Thanks for joining us today.